How's it going?
Tasty. Going good. My name is Siegfried Trent. I'm a call-out debate addict.
That's true. How many have you done in the? I know this is at least second today, right?
Second today. I did one yesterday. I kind of told my wife I'd try to limit to 3 a week, but we'll see.
Yeah, no,
But you are too. So
the thing is, like, I kind of go through like periods where I'll do like a bunch of debates and then I'll be off for like 3 weeks or whatever. But yeah, I think I have this, and then I'll do one tomorrow, and then I have my tournament debate on Monday. So, and then I did one last night. No, and I did one the night before that too. So that's like a bunch every night. Anyway,
we're doomed.
We are doomed. Yeah.
But we're here to talk about what does it mean to have natural rights. And I put in parentheses, this is an open dialogue. So I'm not really trying to win. We're just going to talk about it, which might be boring for some people, but it'll probably be interesting for us. So that works for me.
I have no answer on the actual answer to this, so I'm not going to try and win in any way.
Yeah, you know, and I created the topic because there were a few debates that I watched with some other folks, especially our kind of libertarian friends, of which I sometimes count myself as a member, sometimes not. But American liberalism is founded on this idea of natural rights, largely. Thomas Hobbes, John Locke especially, are philosophers that the Founding Fathers pointed to as the foundation of the individual rights that they hoped to enshrine in the Constitution, and that justified their rebellion from the English monarchs, who were not giving them any representation in the House of Parliament, but making all kinds of fun rules for Americans that we didn't like. So it's, you know, it's really the foundation of a lot of American political thought and theory. And for every true-blooded libertarian who wants to argue that we need small government, right? So, and interestingly, the government that they rail about kind of comes from that tradition as well, but it evolves. So anyway, for those playing at home that aren't too familiar, Thomas Hobbes, actually, I discovered there's a guy named Mosey, a Chinese philosopher, who's actually the first one to record the idea of the state of nature and natural rights. He didn't really get into natural rights, but he talked about the state of nature. And Thomas Hobbes gets into that too, and John Locke kind of carries it forward and solidifies it in a way that most of those folks like. So the idea is that there's a natural state for mankind, that if we dial back the clock of progress, men were roaming the wilderness alone, or similar. I guess they had families. We'll get into that maybe. But this kind of prototypical man is alone in the wilderness, and he meets other men, and this man in the wilderness has all the natural rights God of nature gave him. He can do as he pleases, basically, in the world, and no one can tell him otherwise. And so these are the rights that we have in nature that are God granted, or nature granted, depending on if you're a deist or just or a theist or an atheist or whatever. It doesn't really matter. That's the idea. And so you have the freedom to say what you want, do what you want. Now, Hobbes kind of looked at the state of nature and said it was nasty, brutish, and short, meaning your cavemen friends are likely to club you over the head, take your woman. And that's part of their natural rights too, right? And then your natural rights end. You got clubbed over the head. As where John Locke sees it is more of a more idyllic world in which people voluntarily make arrangements with one another, with their neighbors, and can coexist without the coercion of government or the threat of force, right? And most libertarians think like that's the ideal world. We all respect one another's natural rights, property, and privacy. And there's not much need for government because we're respectful of one another. So that's my kind of in a nutshell summary of natural rights. And I think they generally take it forward as kind of a moral standard, you know, some of them based on the God-given part, and others just sort of based on this is the natural state, therefore it is the best, and therefore we have to respect it. Of course, John Locke kind of wrote about, well, how does government rise up out of this ideal? Because obviously people do need to get together and kind of make arrangements sometimes for the good of everybody else. And so you want a government that treads as little as possible on these natural rights. Since I did the introduction talking, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about your thoughts on these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not exactly a libertarian, but I'm very similar. I actually was... I went to the Libertarian National Convention as a delegate.
Cool.
So I'm very involved in that community. And I would not say as much that I'm a libertarian as I'm a classical liberal. So I think you're similar because you have this sort of a centrist libertarian perspective.
I believe in individual sovereignty as a good, and I think it's a good basis from which to build a society.
Yeah,
I end up in a little bit of a different place sometimes with specific policy than other people do. But
it's interesting that you say that, because that's kind of the same thing that I would say, because you didn't say that as individuals have inherent rights from which it is good to build a society. It's not, you didn't say that. You said you think it's better that we recognize people as having certain things to protect and build a society off of that. I absolutely agree with that. And it's one of the things that is why I lean towards classical liberalism as a philosophy, which is not because it is an automatic right of the people to be left alone, but because we see it having better effects, because practically it works out better when you allow people to make decisions for themselves and when you incentivize them. Because when you see more innovation, when someone is incentivized to innovate, when people have everything taken care of, there's no reason for them to rise above. There's nothing that they should add. Because there's no incentive for them. So to come back to this whole thing, it's practically, I think it's better that society recognize certain codified ideas, protect those, but then don't try to make the each individual the same, which winds up making me similar to a libertarian. Now, to talk about some of you mentioned some of the philosophers, Hobbes and Locke. I think Locke's point is interesting and yet wrong, because his claim is that if we modify the earth and remove it from its state of nature, we then get the right to claim that property as our own. But I don't see where he comes up with this idea. That seems to be a very subjective idea, that if we take this tree and modify it from its state of nature, now we have an inherent right to own that wood. I see no reason to think that that was inherent or natural. It's possible that society should agree that if you take that tree and turn it into a piece of wood, that it would be better to give each person their property. But I don't see any reason to say that that is an inherent right of the person. Moreover, if you say that is the right, what is the right that humanity has to the earth that an elephant doesn't have? There's nothing that we have that an elephant doesn't have except increased rationality and the fact that we said we could do it. But there's no inherent thing that says you have that right. It's just we said we could. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that that's correct. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. My thoughts, my critique on the idea of natural rights generally kind of runs along two lines. One of which is pretty common, which is the idea of man alone in nature is a fiction, right? No man ever lived like that. Men have always lived, human beings have to live in family groups. It doesn't make sense. And they usually live in tribal groups in ancient times, which are usually based on the family. So the family's the core, spreads out from there. And they always had rules. There were always people who were in charge and people who weren't in charge. Maybe the rules were a little different. The scope of authority is different, but there's always been authority. There's always been people telling other people what to do. The man alone is just sort of a philosophical fiction used to kind of look at these ideas. The second is that mostly it's wishful thinking. People want they want an objective moral standard that they can say, aha, it's the moral objective standard. It has authority. You have to obey it. Because, well, that makes it a lot easier, right? And some people just inherently, they have to have that, right? As far as I think it's just, we look around as human beings and we go, what do we want, right? I want to live. I want to have food to eat. I want, when I work and put in effort, that I get reward for it. I don't want other people telling me what to do for the most part, unless I've agreed to it, right? Because I like them as leader. I don't want people taking my stuff. I don't want people telling me I'm bad. There's a lot of things we don't like. And natural rights is a great way to kind of codify and sum that up, right? It's basically about people who are rugged individuals. They don't want other people telling them what to do. So here's my standard. But to me, I have this whole sort of subjective view that we're each our own God in a sense. We are all powerful, rational creatures who have desires and we have power, and we mix those things together And when we come together as a society, we try to integrate those things. And we make some personal sacrifices to get other things we want. I can get more food if I'm willing to give up a little bit of my personal sovereignty. And that's how societies come together. But I think our natural human desires, which have a lot of commonality because we're all made of the same stuff, basically speaking, are going to converge. And so this is just kind of a codification of that. And, you know, liberalism is a powerful idea. It was a rejection of the rights of kings and the rights of lords, the rights of the rich and powerful, have God-granted authority over others, right? And it was a fight against that. And it swept over and pretty much took over most of the world. And I love it, right? I grew up in it, so maybe that's just cultural indoctrination, but I don't like kings. I don't like authority of God. I like natural rights. I support them in many respects. I just don't think that the moral authority that people claim makes a lot of sense. And I think we should be honest and say, we like these things. These are good things for us and for most people. We should agree on that and move forward under that basis, not kid ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this moral authority is something that a lot of Christians like to point to. It's also something that a lot of libertarians like to point to. I actually, since I'm in some libertarian groups on Facebook, my brother, who's a very, he's not nihilist. What is it? He's an absurdist. And so he was challenging me because at the time I just sort of accepted on essentially faith that there were natural rights, that there were these things that just belong to us because we're humans. And then he's like, "How do you know?" And I was like, "Because I don't know." So I asked the libertarian group on Facebook. I was like, "How do we know we have individual rights?" Because every single argument that a libertarian makes is from this idea that individual rights exist. You might have seen I had the debate with Michael about he thought that if homeschooling was taken away, that was an individual natural right, and yet he had no basis for it. There was no reason for him to come to that conclusion except he just thought it was there. So anyway, I asked the libertarians and got hundreds and hundreds of responses, and there were zero logical ones.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. There was.
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think there is a way to logically say just by virtue of being human, we have inherent, natural, deserved rights.
Yeah. No one gave it to us. There's no entitlement. We have to fight for them if we want them, right? Basically.
You could say God, and this is one that Nelson always likes to do. If there is a God, then yes, it is true to a certain extent that infinite being would have a complete knowledge of what is and is not correct and what is and is not deserved by each member of his creation.
Yeah.
So that would state that there are rights that are deserved by humanity. The problem with that, though, is even if that's the case, even if there is a God, we are still finite. And we talked about this in our I guess it wasn't even a debate because we agreed. The thing with Christianity the last time we talked, and if we are finite, and we cannot know what the infinite being knows. So even if infinite being has, by his existence, that means there is an objective good or bad, that there is objective truth. We as finite beings cannot claim to know that.
Yeah.
We can't know the mind of that infinite being. So there may be natural rights, but we can't claim to know them, which is why all we have is our rationality and our ability to go as far as we can through rationality. So when we talk about natural rights, I think we're not actually talking about things that are inherent. We're talking about things that are the most logical things we should protect as a society.
Yeah, I agree. I have some sympathy. Some people will define negative rights versus positive rights when they're talking about civil rights. Negative rights being the idea that they exist until the government takes them away, right? Until some authority takes them from you. So the right to free speech, you can say anything you like until somebody stops you. As our positive rights would be something like the right to be fed. So I will, thus, like a baby chick, I demand to be fed, and I have a right for you to do it. And I think that's a useful distinction, especially for their political philosophy, right? I think it sometimes is splitting hairs, especially when you go back and look at Hobbes and Locke and their arguments. There's a certain amount of assumption that property is infinite, like that if you want to go work up the land and raise your own food, there's always going to be a place to do that. One of the ways, and in America's early period, founding fathers, et cetera, that was the case. I mean, America had space. All I have to do is take it from the Native Americans, unfortunately. Although many of them had died by the time we got here from disease, so there was a lot of open space for us to take. So it makes for a different kind of political philosophy. That kind of Lockean negative rights attitude works pretty good because, yeah, anybody who doesn't like what's going on with the government can go down the hill a little further, get their own plot of land, do their own thing for the most part. However, the world isn't like that anymore. Right now there aren't any more frontiers, no more land to pick up. So we run into a problem with this whole natural rights. If you wanted to eat, all you had to do was go and make some food. Nobody could stop you. But now that's not the case anymore. If I want to go make some food, I need some land in order to do that. If I want some land, I can't just go by the sweat of my brow get it. I gotta get it from somebody. I gotta negotiate and get it away from them. Now you could do that by force, but we of course don't allow that. So you have to buy it. So you got to come up with capital, and then that means at some point in your life you either have to inherit it, get it for free, or you've got to go out and serve somebody else in a way that they like, so they can grant you land, or in our society, more money. So that whole kind of notion that it is a negative right to be able to eat isn't the case anymore. If you want to eat, you have to serve somebody, and you didn't have to do that in the past. And that really, I think, flips a little bit of the libertarian viewpoint. They don't discuss it very often, and that's why sometimes I come down a little differently. In the middle of America, Teddy Roosevelt kind of spurred what you'd call the progressive era and ideals. And a lot of these are actually about liberalism. Many people, classic liberalism, because the idea is that there are people out there who are in a situation where they can't just through the sweat of their brow get what they need because other people have power over them, private power, property power, legal power, whatever it happens to be. And where the government sees these kinds of problems, these roadblocks to people living a life by their own sweat, where it's exploitation, then the government has a responsibility to step in, break that control, give those people an opportunity to have and to build a life with what normally they'd have to kind of pry out of somebody else's hands. So I think, as a kind of classic liberal who loves those kinds of rights, loves the idea that each person should make something of themselves, but I look at the world and I see a world in which those who are already inexistent, those who have the property, can really preclude that libertarian, that ideal from happening. And that's how I kind of tend to extend out into some kinds of government programs, which other libertarians think are terrible, but I see as a recycling, you might say, of the wealth and property in the world. Because as it accumulates up at the top and fewer people have more stuff, that ability to make life by your own hands gets steadily diminished, and it undermines individuality in the end. And one more thing I'll say before I hand it over is you get something like the estate tax and the death tax, right? And that's something, I need to make a topic for that. But I think this is the most fair and libertarian and liberal tax there is, because really it's like, hey, I'm a dead person. My wealth and property are still mine, right? And I'm going to pass them on to my heirs, and we're going to they're going to get richer. You're just going to accumulate wealth and property. And, everybody else who's born today and isn't part of one of these families, well, too bad for you. You're going to have to pay us the sweet money if you want to have any piece of that. So I think if there's anywhere that's fair to erode that kind of collection, that lockout from the ability to go make a living by the sweat of your labor, it's the death tax. Once you die, hey, it's like, give some of that money back so that a new generation can have a chance at it. So put that into education and training, and maybe the loans for people to buy land or to get capital so they can get started in the whole capitalist system. I think that's the way to go.
So to first follow up on the idea of positive versus negative rights, this is another one that I would often use, especially in libertarian circles, the idea of positive versus negative rights. And I still think it's a very good distinction. I agree with you that it's almost always, when you're trying to make a dividing line on what is acceptable versus what isn't, you can point to that whole idea of positive or negative rights, something that we could say is deserved by the individual just by being the individual, versus something that you need to have given to you in order to claim it as a right. I think it's fair. But the thing that I would want to come back to again, though, is that many people try and say that that negative rights are inherent, are natural rights, which is the interesting thing, and the thing that the reason why I see many libertarians so strongly libertarian and so strongly anti-government is because they have this concept that it is an inherent, deserved right simply by their virtue of being human. But I don't think that even exists in the first place. And I think that this is really the dividing line between libertarianism and classical liberalism, in that libertarianism is based on this idea that taxation is theft. It strays toward anarcho-capitalism in the idea that you have to protect the individual because the individual has rights, as opposed to classical liberalism, which is about the idea of aiding the individual by giving the individual liberty. But the difference that I see is that classical liberalism doesn't preclude government. There can be some levels at which government can and probably should aid the individual. And I think you've mentioned this a couple of times. You talked about, for instance, in modern times, the whole idea of negative rights, possibly including food. The things that in the past might not have been a negative right. But what that tells you is that it wasn't an inherent right one way or the other, because the whole concept of inherent rights is that they are inherent simply by being human. But if something is inherent by virtue of being human, then a caveman would have had that same exact right. This is why it always bugs me when sometimes I'll see liberals, progressive liberals, argue this. They'll be like, we have an inherent right to healthcare. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Healthcare is a modern creation. It is a figment of humanity in modern times. Caveman could not have said, I had a right to a $20 copay on my health insurance, because health insurance didn't exist. So you can't claim that as an inherent right. You could say, and here's the next thing I want to go into here. The difference between, I don't actually like the word rights. I don't like it because I think that it gets into all of these very touchy issues. And I think everyone has a different idea of it because of this whole idea that it's inherent. And so when you say rights, people go, oh, that's something I deserve. But I don't think that's true. And when we were talking about the basis of that, I think a better word for it is privileges. I think that, okay, you have something to say on that.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. And again, we agree. You know, we phrase things a little differently, which is kind of what this discussion is about. Yeah. But yeah, you know, when I talk with people about natural rights, if I'm arguing with them, right, I will say, look, what meaning does your right have in a state of nature? Hi, I have the right to life, and a tiger comes and eats you. Did you lose your right to life? I don't understand, right? Like, I have the right to say what I want. Yeah, and nobody cares because nobody's there. So it's a right without a meaning. Right? Rights only have a meaning when you get into a society and there's a conflict of power. And I say, your mama's so ugly, and he punches me in the face, right? Now we're talking about some rights. He's disputing my right to free speech, and I dispute his right not to punch me in my right to my physical integrity. Now we have rights, right? And, you know, in the ugly, brutish, and short, maybe we don't have any rules, but then we get together. We're like, okay, look, this is the team of Caveman X. We're all going to get together. We're going to make some rules here so that we can all work together and cooperate. Now we're really in man's natural state, right, which is cooperative. Human beings, while they fought each other for millions of years, also had to be cooperative to survive. We are social creatures. It is in our DNA. It's in our ability to have language, everything. We are designed to survive by social power, and that means cooperation. That means some rules. And so that's what's natural. So what is a right? It is a socially agreed upon rule of some kind that codifies what my individual sovereignty entitles me to. Now, in a real hierarchical society, that might be nothing if I'm on the bottom, right? However, in a liberal-based society, the idea is we all have equality under the law, so we all have the same basic rights. We differentiate a little bit for practical reasons. Some people are leaders, some people are not, etc. But that's the basic idea. That's the difference between liberalism and monarchy type constructions. I don't know what to call that in general, but authoritarianism. There we go. So yeah, rights are codified rules of society, and you know what? They could be anything we want them to be. We can say you have a right not to spend any money on the government whatsoever. If we write that down and we all agree to it, then that's a right. If we say everybody is entitled to health insurance and we codify that in law, then it becomes a right too. There's no set prescribed for what is. Now, people can point to the traditions of American law and say, look at the founding fathers and how we developed things, and in our ethos, in our society, this is what's proper and this is what's good, and maybe healthcare for everybody isn't good, maybe it is. But we can make those arguments, right? So I think there's definitely lines along which we can test what should be rights and what shouldn't be rights based on what we want and based on what we believe, but not based on some cosmic rule, right? That's what you don't get to do. Doesn't work that way. No, we get levels. So the Constitution enshrines a lot of ideas, and we look to that as an authority. That's okay. We made it. We respect it. We choose it as an authority. So it's good to have. But it's not cosmic objective truth. It's still a work of mankind. And I think we always have to deal with that fact. Too many people want to it's intellectual shortchanging by saying, no, God tells us all what's right and wrong. And yeah, well, as you point out, even if he does, there are billions of religious people who all have different opinions about what God thinks. And so in the end, we still have to deal with what humans think and argue back and forth about it. You can argue what God thinks, or you can argue what I think. In the end, it really doesn't matter.
Speaking of what doesn't matter, according to that whole thing, and I agree with everything you're saying there, but if that is all true, and I think it is, that means that rights are more or less meaningless. Because even according to your definition, a right is a socially agreed upon rule of some kind that codifies my individual sovereignty. I like that definition. I think it's pretty accurate. The interesting thing about it, though, is it means that rights literally do come from governments or from society. They don't come from within us. They come from without us, which is why I think it's actually better referred to as privileges, because they're things that society has chosen to protect among us. And I think there's a good reason for that, in that each of us as individuals know that our life will be better if the people around us recognize our privileges. And so in so doing, we can do the same for them and recognize, oh, your life would also be better if I recognize these as privileges. But they're not rights, because they don't come from inside us. They come from outside of us, from society or from government, which is, it feels dirty to say that it's possible that rights come from governments, because I mean, I've been libertarian for a while, so it's hard to say that. But logically, I think you kind of have to come to that conclusion. But then the last thing to say there is, if rights come from without, which it does appear that they do, they're rights and or privileges, however you want to phrase it, then there's no such thing as a natural right, or there may not even be such thing as a specific right in and of itself, because it's entirely subjective. So it's entirely a practical concept, and we all have different interpretations of what should be codified as an actual right, which means there is no correct, well, maybe there is a correct answer. It's possible. This is the thing that I always come back to, is it's possible that there is an absolute truth. It's possible that there's an objective answer to these questions of what is or is not a right. But if the only means that we humans have of coming to that is our rationality, then we will never know in and of ourselves. So for us to claim things as rights is entirely subjective.
Yeah, I think so. And I argue kind of a similar line along morality, right? This is sort of the conclusions I've come to in life and observing things. Yet, as I tell people, I'm also a pragmatist. So I look around and I realize, you know what? Well, we make it work anyway, right? And if natural rights are a good selling point for people not to get in my business and tell me what to worship or tell me how to live my life, well, okay, I keep quiet on the subject in some circumstances, right? It's actually when people come get in my face or doing something I don't agree with that, I'll trot out some of these arguments as ammunition. So somebody comes up and tells me, well, healthcare isn't a right. Screw those people. Let them die. I'll say, look, I, as a member of society, don't want to say that. Like, we have this technology. I think we should use it. It's good to keep people alive. It's good for everybody. Maybe not everybody gets the best care because we can't afford that. But look, let's take care of people to a certain degree that we think is reasonable. We don't have to call it a right. We can call it a gift. Whatever you wanted to call it, right? I don't care. But then they'll come back and they're like, it's my tax money. Don't take that from me. I mean, I don't like paying taxes, especially either, right? But to me, I guess, and I always have this thing, well, look, I'd rather be a little poorer than dead. I think it would be nice if we would, as a cooperative society, make some accommodations to help people out who are having some trouble. I don't know. So yeah, I have this kind of pragmatic streak. And when somebody comes at me and says, no, Locke, natural rights, impossible. Yeah, just like, not impossible. It's been done. We can do it. You can argue with me about it. That's great. But you know what? We're on equal footing. You don't get to say there's a cosmic truth that tells me I'm wrong. You have to duke it out based on your own wits and your own persuasiveness. And that's one thing that, I'm here on QallOut, and I'm really interested in learning how to persuade people on political issues, because I think that's the only way you get anything done. So in a way, I'm kind of studying these arts and trying to explore them so that I can win those battles, right? And, on equal footing with other people. And because I think, how do you get society? How do you get these rights or privileges, as you say? Well, you have to come together in agreement. So building agreement, building some consensus is kind of what being society is all about.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's actually the reason I enjoy QallOut myself, is because you get to hear the other side from a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives. And I get to test my own arguments and test the framing of them and see how it works. And I'm probably not as mature as you, because one thing that I think
that is old.
Well, no, mature is actually the word I meant to use there.
I know, I'm just joking.
Because you have done a very good job. You just won the tournament, after all. You've done a very good job of making your perspectives not offend anyone out there. Whereas I tend to have similar perspective. We don't always agree, but we're pretty close. But I do wind up overstepping some of those, like, I don't know if I don't make it personal or anything, but sometimes I don't frame things in a way that will bring someone over to my side, which is what I need to work on. And when I have a difference of opinion with someone like Nelson or Michael, usually it's those two, but
yeah, me too.
But I do need to find a better way of framing things, and I think that you're better at that than I am. So.
Well, I think that's from it's just experience, right? Like, so I've been arguing on the internet since before there was an internet. I used to go on modem BBSs, right, and dial up into people's little private BBSs, get on there and argue about whether there's a God or not, right? So I stepped on plenty of toes and pissed some people off from time to time, and I was young and probably had some pretty dumb ideas. If I read them now, I'd be like, oh my God, what are they thinking? But yeah, you just get used to it, and then but I like people. I like all people, really, and so I hate it when I rub them the wrong way. So just over time, I learned to rub people the right way. It's kind of off topic, but one thing I find is really important is try to identify what people's values are. What's the kind of core identity they have. And I think most people, this is why rights are similar, or people's views on them are similar. Most people have a lot of core ideas, feelings, thoughts that are kind of the same. And if you dig past a lot of the kind of surface stuff, the cultural teams and symbols, blah, 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 you get down to some kind of core ideas that most people, if they're not psychotic, etc., which I've met a few, share, right? And that gives you an avenue to contact them in both, and it comes a little bit both in what you say and how you say it. So I'll match styles a little bit, like I was debating with Michael Vineyard today, right? And I knew, he's a passionate guy. He's firm in what he thinks. And so I knew, going into a debate with a guy like that, if I take a casual kind of, like this kind of tone, he's not going to respect that, right? So I'm going to come forcefully and with a lot of stridence, and I damn well know what my opinion is, and here's what it is. So I'm connecting with him a little bit on a stylistic level, right? And he respects strength and kind of firmness. And also, I'm appealing, because I know he's a classic liberal, appealing to classic liberal values. So I'll frame my argument in that sense, right? Because for me, that is the same core. We come to different places, but we start at that core. And so that gives me the power to make a better argument for him that he can respect. And then we're just going to interact better that way.
Yeah, I agree. I always thought he was more of like a conservative libertarian more than a classical liberal, but maybe he is. I'm not sure. But yeah, I know that's
similar, but
it's interesting that you mentioned the core values that everyone has, because I think that comes back to this whole the reason we would have this conversation in the first place. Many people, as a core value, believe in inherent rights, and there's two reasons that I see that people base their opinions off of those. And the first one is obviously God. And people believe that there is a God, and they believe that this God must have been good. I don't know why they would believe that. If you just look around the world, you see enough in it that does not prove the God had to be good. It's possible that he was good, but it's not in any way shown to be accurate.
God likes drama, is what I like to say.
I remember
you look at the world, that's what he likes.
I think that's certainly more proven, or at least it's more apparent. If
that's what it seems to me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. But so the idea of a God, if there is a God, then there would probably be natural rights, because people want to believe that there's someone who has created something that works for them, that they have a chance, that there is an afterlife for them. I think that there is, and it's part of the reason why I enjoy debating religion, but I also kind of don't want to win.
Yeah,
because it's not easier to.
No.
So it's like even if I win, I kind of lose, because I feel like I've kind of damaged their world. So I never know what the correct thing is on that. But the second reason why someone would believe in natural rights is because they've just been mindlessly reciting from the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, and this whole idea of that man was endowed by his creator with certain inalienable rights. And we just repeat that. And we never ask, how did they come to that conclusion? And when people do try and look at the reasons for it, it really is as simple as John Locke's man takes something out of a state of nature and then it becomes his. But
he's the prophet of natural rights. Yeah, absolutely. For me, now this ties into my religion as well. I think they're very related. I think religion comes from human desires. It comes from needs that we have, and we look for a way to fulfill these needs. And I think natural rights are very similar. We, as human beings, yearn for sovereignty, liberalism, our own sense of self, to one degree or another. Some people less than others, right? But it depends. We yearn for these things, and so we construct a belief system, or we attach ourselves to one that we find that satisfies those desires and those needs and those passions. Same with religion. If you fear death, if you are crushed emotionally by the thought that you'll never see your father again, or your brother, or whatever it is, which I totally understand, you need something that gives you hope. You need something that tells you that's not as bad as it seems, right? And so we have these things, right? And yeah, like you say, I don't want to take that away. Like, if it makes you feel good, if it gives you life satisfaction, that's great. Just don't try to whip me with it, and we're good, right? But so I think natural rights comes from the same place. It's very much like religion. We, and myself included, want to have these rights, right? We like them, we love them, and so anything we can point to that says, we deserve them, well, there you go. It's nice to have. In a way, once you go through the looking glass, like kind of where we are, you're like, oh boy, what do I do now? Yeah. But in the end, like I said, I just kind of give up and I say, well, you know what? Practically, I'll just fight for them whenever I can. And occasionally I'll use, I don't say natural rights much, but I say individual sovereignty as, something. And so I'll use that rhetoric occasionally. I think you've seen me on a debate maybe say, that's not American. Thing to say. But somewhere in my heart, I believe that, right? I'm kind of proud to be an American, and I like the idea of American liberalism. I grew up in it, so if the shoe fits, wear it. That's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of who we are. I'm proud that my family is Irish. I have no legitimate, logical reason to be proud of that. There's nothing about it that's particularly beneficial, but I like being me, so I'll be proud of my family because I want to. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, I would rather that things be rational as much as we can, but there are certain things where I don't think it's bad to just follow what we feel. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, unless, and here's where it becomes a problem, and it would be a problem if we did it. I'll use Irish again as an example. If I came to the conclusion that because I'm Irish, therefore Irish people are better, therefore I have the right to discriminate against German people. That would be using my feelings, my faith, to harm someone else. Yeah. And along the same lines, if someone believed I have natural rights, my natural rights necessarily give me this, which causes a problem for you, well, they would be believing by faith something which hurts someone else. And that would be irrational, that'd be wrong, and it would be dangerous because they don't even have a reason to have started with that belief in the first place. I think if you have a rational basis for your belief in the first place, then you could make that argument that, okay, and therefore I can preclude that person over there. But if your entire starting point was, I believe this, and then because you believe this, you change your beliefs. For instance, I think a good one on this would be Christianity and homosexuality. If you are against homosexuality just because you're a Christian, but you're a Christian just by faith, well, then you are discriminating against someone just by faith. Not because there's anything rationally right or wrong about what they're doing, just because you've randomly decided that that is your basis. So I think that's where ultimately the problem would come in. So I agree with you that natural rights, if there's nothing wrong with believing in them and everything, but more of just this whole, how far do you take it?
Yeah, how rigid are you in that advocacy to the exclusion of other things that we can point to and understand? Yeah, and dogma is something that I always find a little problematic for that reason, because it sort of says you can't think for yourself, you got to follow these rules, and rules sometimes don't work. To be honest, there are situations where they break down, and we need the flexibility to be able to get beyond that. In a way, even my system, and in a sense your system, when we talk about harming people or helping people, is based on a kind of faith, and that faith is in, you might say, the intrinsic goodness and rationality of our fellow human beings.
And ourselves.
Yeah, and in ourselves.
A certain level of faith in our own rationality.
Yeah, totally. And, what choice do we have but to have some kind of faith in something, right? So for us, we're kind of reducing it to ourselves, and then by extension, other people who we see as being at least to some degree like this. And I have found in life that, if you appeal to people's good nature and kindness, love, honor, you do well, right? You mostly hit pay dirt most of the time. Every once in a while, you get somebody who is sociopathic, right? To use a technical term, who only cares about themselves, doesn't have that social instinct, doesn't have a kindness for other people, it's just a means to end. And yeah, those guys are really hard to relate and connect to and work with on any kind of level. That's where my faith, in a sense, my rational system breaks down and doesn't work very well. And so in those cases, I have to adapt an alternative strategy, which is authority and, just using brute force to protect myself and others.
I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
Yeah. You kind of devolve into what might makes right. So, and that's one reason I don't like to, if I talk to some religious people, I don't want to put my view ahead of theirs, above theirs. So we both have a kind of faith. They'll usually say, I have a faith that there is no God. And that's not really true. But I do kind of have a faith in mankind. I'm a secular humanist, I guess you might say. I think they often misunderstand what that means, really. But it is a kind of faith. I have faith in people. Not that they're all good, but enough of them are, most of them are, that human society knowledge progresses, it gets better. I'm also inherently optimistic, I guess. Critical, but optimistic, which is a weird combo.
That's interesting because I'm much more naturally pessimistic.
Mm-hmm.
I look at history, I look at flaws, and I think that since history often repeats itself, I feel like this will happen again. I think that they're probably I have optimism in an individual, but pessimism in society as a whole.
Yeah, a famous quote I like is, there's two kinds of people, those for who life is a tragedy and those for who for life is a comedy.